In early 1859, something appeared in the St. Martin Parish tax registry that no one remembered seeing before. There was no public land auction notice printed in the New Orleans papers. No inheritance filing tied to old plantation bloodlines. No foreclosure proceeding transferring ownership quietly between wealthy families. Yet there it was, written in steady black ink between two long-established sugar states. Lafayette Stock and Improvement Property, 812 acres. Owner, Edwin Marchand. 800 acres of swamp border land did not change hands quietly. Not in Louisiana. Not in that era. Land was currency. Land was power. Land was generational. And yet no one in town could recall the moment Marchand acquired it. Edwin Marchand himself was not unknown, but he was not rooted either. He had shipping interests along the Mississippi. He had connections in New Orleans trade circles. He appeared at port offices more often than at social gatherings. He paid in cash. He avoided conversation. Within 3 months of the tax entry, construction began deep inside the swamp. That, more than anything, unsettled the neighboring planters. The land was low, heavy with cypress and blackwater pools. Most consider it poor agricultural territory unless aggressively drained. Sugar cane demanded stable soil. Cotton required dry stretch. Marchand cleared land, but not into fields. Instead, timber shipments arrived at dusk. Brick came in heavy crates without identifying marks. Iron hardware was delivered under canvas. The workforce that assembled the structures rarely appeared on the main road. By late summer 1859, the estate stood complete, but it did not resemble a plantation. There were no wide, open rows of cane swaying in humid wind. No cotton fields stretching in patterned grids. No mule barns, no gin houses, no sugar-press chimneys venting thick smoke during processing season. Instead, the property was segmented. Tall timber fencing surrounded multiple enclosed yards. Corner towers overlooked the interior, not the swamp beyond. A central rectangular hall stood in the middle of the compound, with no windows facing outward. No crops were visible. But wagons arrived, monthly, from New Orleans slave markets. Young women, healthy, strong, within prime childbearing age, were purchased consistently. They were bought above standard market rate. Healthy men, in limited numbers, followed. Children were rarely purchased. That pattern did not go unnoticed. On traditional plantations, children represented future labor, but they were long-term investments. Marchand appeared uninterested in that delay, which meant only one possibility. Children were being born inside. By autumn 1859, locals had already assigned the property a new name. They did not use it publicly. They used it in whispers. The breeding farm. The nickname carried accusation, but it also carried logic, because the estate produced no visible crops. It shipped no sugar barrels. It sent no cotton bales to port. Yet it expanded. 2 additional housing wings were added before winter, separate compounds for men and women. A third structure appeared that resembled a medical facility more than a labor quarter. Midwives were seen entering the gates. Physicians, clerks carrying bound ledgers thicker than crop yield books. And above all, silence. In Louisiana, silence is unnatural. Even distant plantations carry sound across humid air. Tools striking wood, overseers shouting, field hands singing rhythmically through labor. But from Marchand's estate, nothing, not peace, not activity, nothing. The silence felt deliberate, engineered. In February 1860, state contracted surveyor Henri Duval was tasked with updating parish maps to include swamp drainage routes for future timber development. His orders required charting all significant properties bordering navigable water. When he approached Marchand's estate requesting boundary confirmation, he was denied entry. A state surveyor. Denied. Duval cited official authority. The gate remained closed. From a tree-lined vantage, Duval sketched what he observed. Housing quarters divided by gender. Children's yard visible at distance. Central administrative hall reinforced heavily. No cultivated land in sight. He wrote in his notebook. No agricultural output visible. primary function unclear. In town, Duval made inquiries. Marchand had paid for property outright. No loan, no partner, no mortgage. He held quiet influence in shipping circles. He moved goods across state lines. And he did so without spectacle. One dock worker told Duval quietly, "They don't grow cane there. They grow stock." Duval did not write that in official record, but he did not forget it either. When he submitted his draft map, including the estate, it was returned to him. The property had been erased, replaced with blank swamp. The clerk's explanation was simple. "You marked undeveloped land." Duval stared at the page. He had drawn buildings, fences, road access. Now they were gone. And in that moment, Duval realized something more dangerous than rumor was at work. The estate was protected, not by isolation, but by silence reinforced in ink. Henri Duval did not forget the erase map. He redrew it from memory, twice. The second copy he hid beneath the false bottom of his travel trunk, because what disturbed him was not only what he had seen, it was how quickly it had been removed. By early spring of 1860, Duval returned to the swamp, not as a surveyor this time, but as an observer. The Louisiana wetlands were unforgiving. Mud pulled at his boots. Mosquitoes clouded his vision. Cypress roots twisted like skeletal fingers through dark water. But fog was heavy that evening, rolling low and thick. It concealed him. From a concealed vantage beyond the rear timber fence, Duval watched. Lantern light flickered inside the compound. Movement was organized. Women were escorted from their housing quarters in small groups of 3 or 4. They were not chained. They were not rushed. They were scheduled. A physician waited beneath the overhang of the central hall. A clerk sat beside him with an open ledger. Each woman was examined. Height measured. Weight recorded. Pulse checked. Abdomen assessed. Duval strained to hear, but the estate's design swallowed sound. The walls of the buildings were double-layered timber packed with insulating material. Even raised voices would struggle to travel beyond the yard. Silence wasn't accidental. It was constructed. Men were examined separately in another structure, their strength assessed through controlled tests, lifting weighted crates, timed endurance drills, grip strength measured by iron clamps. Everything recorded, nothing improvised. Duval felt the realization settle into something colder than fear. This was not chaotic brutality. This was administration. The central hall functioned as a registry. Through a gap in the partially drawn shutters, Duval glimpsed shelves stacked with thick-bound volumes, each spine labeled by year, some subdivided further by what appeared to be generational codes. Lineage tracking. Pairings were not random. They were assigned. A clerk would consult the ledger, then quietly instruct which man and woman would be relocated to a designated housing chamber for a set duration. Pregnancies were documented precisely. Gestation timelines monitored. Midwives remained on site permanently. Infants were delivered in a separate wing. And here was a detail that hollowed Duval's chest. Children were removed from their mothers at regulated intervals. Not violently in public display, but procedurally. Boys relocated to one yard, girls to another. Each group supervised. Growth recorded in annual increments. Height, weight, health stability, resistance to illness. The estate had eliminated unpredictability. It had converted human life into inventory. Marchand had calculated something monstrous in its simplicity. Why rely on volatile slave auctions, where price fluctuated based on demand and speculation, when you could produce your own supply? A closed system meant predictable output, predictable profit, no auction fees, no transport risk, no external dependency. Duval observed wagons leaving the state only twice in 2 months. Both departures occurred after midnight. Adolescents, perhaps 15 to 18 years old, were loaded under canvas. Healthy, conditioned, silent. Each wagon accompanied by a sealed crate of documents. Origin not listed publicly, merely labeled, private source. The phrase appeared repeatedly in port manifests weeks later. Duval began cross-referencing quietly. Several auctions in neighboring states listed unusually well-documented stock. Exact age known to the month. Parental lineage recorded. Medical history detailed. That level of documentation was rare. It meant those individuals came from a centralized registry. The breeding farm was not rumor. It was enterprise. Inside the estate, there was no visible cruelty spectacle, no whip display, no shouting overseer theatrics, because discipline was systemic. Food rations were calculated to optimize health. Sleeping quarters were monitored for compliance. Movement was controlled through schedule, not chaos. Silence was maintained not through fear alone, but through structure. Duval noticed something else. There were no elderly individuals visible inside the yard, no aging laborers, no worn-out workers, which meant one of two things. Either individuals were sold at prime productivity, or they were removed. There were no burial plots visible near the estate, no grave markers, nothing suggesting generational permanence. This was not a community. It was a cycle. By midsummer 1860, supply deliveries to the estate began decreasing. Medical shipments slowed. Cloth deliveries stopped entirely. Iron shipments ceased. Duval sensed something shifting. In August, smoke rose above the swamp, low and controlled, not chaotic wildfire. 3 consecutive nights. Lanterns burned inside the compound longer than usual. Movement intensified. Duval crept closer. On the second night, through the fog, he saw dismantling, not destruction. Dismantling. Timber beams removed carefully. Bricks stacked onto wagons. Iron fixtures unscrewed. Documents boxed. Ledgers carried from the central hall under heavy escort. Marchand himself appeared briefly in the yard, composed, directing movement calmly. This was not panic. It was evacuation. By the third night, the largest housing wing had already been disassembled. By dawn of the fourth day, the estate was gone. No charred debris, no collapsed beams, no abandoned structures. Even fence posts had been uprooted. The ground was flattened, ash scattered thinly across soil to mask disturbance. Tracks brushed away deliberately. It was surgical. And within 2 weeks, Parish maps showed uninterrupted swamp. When the estate disappeared, most assumed it had never existed. That was the intention. But systems at large leave fractures, even when carefully dismantled. Henri Duval understood something most men did not. Buildings can vanish. Paper burns. But profit leaves trails. And profit was the one thing Marchand would never abandon. After the compound was removed, Duval turned his attention not to the swamp, but to shipping ledgers. New Orleans port records were meticulous. Every shipment, every transfer of property, every financial exchange tied to cargo taxes and insurance filings had to be documented somewhere. He began searching for the phrase he had memorized. Private source. It appeared again, and again, and again, over a span of 5 years. Shipments of enslaved individuals, unusually well documented, appearing under no plantation name, no estate listing, no auction origin, just private source. The buyers were wealthy plantation owners across Louisiana, Mississippi, and parts of Texas. The prices were consistently higher than average market value. Why? Because these individuals came with something rare. Full lineage documentation, medical stability records, exact ages, predictable physical condition. In a market driven by uncertainty, predictability was gold. Duval noticed something even more disturbing. The frequency of these shipments sharply declined in late 1860. By early 1861, they stopped completely. April 1861, the Civil War began, and suddenly the disappearance of the estate made perfect sense. Marchand had seen it coming. Political tensions had been rising for years. Secession whispers turned into public speeches. Armed conflict was no longer a possibility. It was inevitable, and war changes economics. If the Confederacy lost, slavery would collapse. If slavery collapsed, a breeding enterprise built entirely on generational supply would become worthless overnight. Marchand did not dismantle his estate out of fear. He dismantled it out of calculation. He liquidated inventory at peak value, sold remaining adolescents into long-term plantations, boxed the ledgers, moved the capital, then erased the infrastructure before war could expose it. It was not a retreat. It was an exit strategy. But where did the money go? Duval followed land transfer documents over the next 2 years. In late 1860, large tracts of inland property were purchased under a new corporate entity, M.R. Holdings. The initials were subtle, Marchand Rene, but there was no estate, no visible operation, just land acquisitions. After the war ended in 1865, M.R. Holdings quietly dissolved. Assets transferred again, this time to northern banks. Investments appeared in railroads, timber contracts, shipping companies. The fortune had migrated. It no longer needed human inventory. It adapted. Marchand himself vanished from public records after 1862. No obituary, no burial record, no confirmed death certificate. Rumors suggested he fled to Europe. Others claimed he died of fever, but no evidence confirmed either. He became what his estate became, absent, yet funded. Duval's final visit to the swamp occurred in 1867. War had ended. Emancipation declared. Plantations were collapsing under new labor systems. The swamp had begun reclaiming its silence. Cypress trees stood undisturbed. Water lapped against mossy roots. If you walked through the area without knowing, you would see nothing unusual. But Duval knew where to look. Beneath shallow soil, fragments remained. Iron hinge pieces, brick shards too uniform to be natural, a rusted measuring clamp half buried in mud, and something else, a square indentation in the earth where the central hall once stood. The ground there settled differently, softer, disturbed deeper than surrounding land. He dug carefully, only inches, and found charcoal fragments, burned paper residue, ash mixed with wax seal remnants. Someone had attempted to destroy documentation on site before transporting the rest. It had not fully disintegrated. Duval brushed dirt from a fragment. On it, barely visible, a column heading. Lineage. He did not take it. He left it there, because by 1867, exposing it would do little. The war had already dismantled the legal system that sustained it. But the silence troubled him. Not the swamp, not the vanished buildings, the silence in records, the absence of testimony, the fact that something so structured, so methodical, so large, had existed for years without public scrutiny. The estate was not hidden because it was secret. It was hidden because it was profitable, and profitability attracts protection. Clerks were paid, officials looked away. Transport logs were simplified, language was softened, breeding never appeared in official filings, only production stability, inventory sustainability, private source. History remembers violence in spectacle, chains, whips, revolts, but it often forgets violence in bureaucracy. The Louisiana breeding estate was not chaos. It was paperwork, schedules, optimization. That is what makes it unsettling, because systems like that do not require rage. They require compliance. After Duval's death in 1873, his private notes were discovered among his belongings. Hand-drawn maps, cross-referenced port records, shipping timelines, financial tracing. Most of it was dismissed as speculation. There was no standing structure to prove it, no living witnesses who would speak. And many of those born within that estate would never know their origin. They were sold young, renamed, absorbed into other plantations, their birthplace erased from memory before they could form it, which may be the cruelest detail of all. The estate did not just disappear from maps. It disappeared from identity. Today, if you search 1860 Louisiana Parish maps, you will find uninterrupted